Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your city, your state, or your country? This story happened in Lagos, Nigeria, but its message is for everyone. Some battles don't arrive with a noise or violence. They come quietly with smiles, good manners, and help that feels like an answered prayer. This is not just a story about a housemaid. It is a story about discernment, about how exhaustion can make us careless, how convenience can silence intuition, how temptation opens doors that prayer must later fight to close. In far cities like Lagos, families are stretched thin. Careers demand time, children need attention. Faith is often practiced quietly, squeezed between responsibilities. And in those moments when we whisper, "God, I just need help," something always listens. Heaven listens, but so does darkness. What if the help that arrived came with an assignment? What if peace was only temporary? What if perfection itself was a disguise? As you listen, don't just watch, reflect. If darkness ever knocked on your door wearing a smile, would you recognize it in time? Tell us where you're watching from. Settle in and listen carefully. Because this story is not meant to scare you. It is meant to wake you up. From the outside, the Adebayo home on Lekki Chevron Drive looked like answered prayers. Tall gates stood firm beneath the Lagos sun. Trimmed hedges lined the driveway. Security men greeted visitors with respect. At dawn, birds sang from palm trees that framed the compound like quiet witnesses. Anyone passing by would assume peace lived there permanently. But peace, Adanna Adebayo had learned, could be deceptive. At 4:30 a.m., her alarm vibrated softly. Adanna was already awake. She rose from bed without waking Daniel, her husband, tied her robe, and moved through the house with the practiced silence of a woman who had learned to carry many responsibilities without complaint. Her laptop bag hung from one shoulder, her phone pressed to her ear as she reviewed figures for a crucial strategy meeting at Oryx Technologies on Victoria Island. By the time most of Lagos was still asleep, Adanna had already begun fighting 3 battles: work, motherhood, and faith. She checked on the children one by one. Zara lay asleep with her schoolbook still open, pencil clutched loosely in her or her hand. Tommy and Tyle were tangled in blankets, one leg draped over the other, breathing deeply. And then there was Eliam, barely 6 months old, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Adanna lingered there. She placed her palm gently on Eliam's chest and whispered a prayer so quiet it barely disturbed the air. "Lord, cover them today." There was no thunder in her voice, no tears, just faith spoken like breath. By 6 a.m., the house erupted into controlled chaos. Toast burned, tea spilled. The twins argued over socks. Zara needed help with her hair. Eliam cried inconsolably, right as Adanna's driver announced he was waiting at the gate. Then her phone rang. "Ma," her assistant said anxiously. "The board members are already seated." Adanna closed her eyes for half a second. That was the moment something cracked, not loudly, but quietly. She loved her children. She loved her work. She loved God. But trying to be everything at once was slowly draining her strength, and she felt it. That night, after returning home long past sunset, Adanna knelt beside her bed. Her prayer was not dramatic. It was honest. "God, I need help," she whispered. Not shortcuts, not chaos, just help. She rose, unaware that such a sincere prayer does not go unheard by heaven or by darkness. Because in the spiritual realm, every request attracts attention, and 2 days later, help arrived. Adanna did not yet know it, but the battle for her home had already begun, not with noise, not with fear, but with convenience. And the most dangerous attacks always start that way. The answer to Adanna's prayer arrived quietly, almost respectfully. It was a Tuesday afternoon when her phone rang again, this time from a woman she barely remembered, a distant church contact, someone she had met once at a women's conference years ago. "I heard you were looking for help," the woman said warmly. "There's a young lady I trust, very decent, God-fearing, hard-working." Those words settled easily in Adanna's tired heart. 2 days later, Nkiru Okafor stood at the gate of the Adebayo home. She was neatly dressed, modest but clean. Her hair was pulled back simply. Her eyes stayed lowered as she greeted Adanna, her voice soft and carefully respectful. "Good afternoon, Ma. Thank you for seeing me." She answered every question precisely: where she was from, who recommended her, what she could do, cooking, cleaning, childcare, laundry. Nothing excessive, nothing suspicious. And yet, from the first hour, something about her efficiency felt uncommon. The floors gleamed. The kitchen smelled warm and inviting. Eliam stopped crying the moment Nkiru carried him. He giggled, a soft, bubbling laugh that surprised Adanna. By evening, dinner was perfectly timed. The children were calm. The house felt lighter. Adanna sat at the dining table, hands folded loosely in front of her, unsure why her chest suddenly felt less tight. That night, for the first time in years, she slept without setting multiple alarms. Within a week, the change was undeniable. Breakfast was ready before anyone asked. School uniforms appeared pressed and waiting. Laundry folded with military precision. The house ran smoothly, almost effortlessly. Adanna found herself breathing again. At work, her performance soared. She closed deals faster, chaired meetings with clarity, left the office before sunset, something she hadn't done in years. Daniel noticed too. "You look rested," he said one evening, smiling as he loosened his tie. "That maid of yours, she's a blessing." Adanna smiled back, but something in her spirit paused. It wasn't fear. It wasn't suspicion. It was quieter than that, a hesitation she couldn't explain. Still, each night she prayed. She laid hands on her children before bed, whispered blessings over their rooms, spoke protection over the kitchen, the doors, the walls. And somewhere unseen, something watched. Because peace had entered the house, but not all peace comes from God. Sometimes peace is the silence before resistance is tested. And the help Adanna had welcomed into her home had not come by accident. The house had been noticed, and the assignment had begun. The first warning did not come as fear. It came as unease, the kind that slips into your spirit without words. Adanna noticed it late one night when the house was finally asleep. Daniel's breathing was slow beside her. The children were quiet. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Something nudged her awake. She rose quietly, moving through the hallway the way only a mother does, alert even in stillness. Zara's door was half open. She peeked in. Peaceful, the twins slept soundly. Then she passed the nanny quarters. The door was slightly ajar. Adanna slowed. Inside, Nkiru lay on her bed, but not normally. Her back was flat against the mattress, her legs raised and pressed straight up against the wall, unnaturally still. Her arms lay by her sides. Her eyes were open, wide, unblinking. For a brief second, their eyes met. Adanna's breath caught. Then Nkiru blinked slowly and smiled. "Ma," she said gently, as if nothing was strange at all. "Sorry, I pray like this sometimes." Adanna nodded, forcing her feet to move. People have strange habits, she told herself. The next morning, she anointed the children quietly before leaving for work. She lingered longer in prayer that night. Still, nothing went missing. No money disappeared, no jewelry, no food shortage. Friends complained endlessly about dishonest housemaids. Adanna thanked God for hers. Yet the small things continued. Nkiru sometimes stared at the children a little too long. Sometimes she smiled when no one had spoken. Sometimes, when Adanna prayed aloud, Nkiru went completely still, like a paused image. Daniel began spending more time in the living room in the evenings. Adanna noticed the way his eyes followed Nkiru as she moved about the house. Efficient, graceful, head respectfully bowed. "She works like 10 people combined," he said casually one night. Admiration slipped too easily into his voice. Something tightened in Adanna's chest. That night, she prayed again. Not louder, just longer. She laid hands on the walls, on the doors, on her marriage. And unseen to human eyes, something dark shifted farther back into the shadows. Because prayer does not always chase darkness away immediately. Sometimes it makes it wait. And the most dangerous enemies are the ones who are patient. As Adanna slept, unaware of how closely she was being observed, the house remained calm. Too calm, because perfection is not always divine. Sometimes it is strategic. The morning Adanna left the house feeling unusually light was the morning everything shifted. She kissed Zara on the forehead, adjusted the twins' collars, and lingered briefly with Eliam, pressing her lips to his soft hair. As she handed the baby to Nkiru, Eliam giggled, his small hands clutching the front of the maid's uniform. The sound eased Adanna's heart. "Thank you," she said softly. Nkiru lowered her head. "It is my duty, Ma." The gate closed behind Adanna's car with a metallic click. And the house listened. At first, nothing happened. The generator hummed outside. Traffic murmured faintly from the Lekki-Epe expressway. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Then the silence deepened. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind. As though the air itself had thickened, pressing inward. Nkiru stood still in the living room, listening. When she was certain Adanna was gone, she walked slowly to the front door and turned the lock. The smile on her face faded, not into anger, but into emptiness. In the nursery, Eliam stirred. Nkiru entered, lifting him gently. Her movements were fluid now, deliberate. As she rocked him, something beneath her skin began to shift. Not violently, not suddenly, naturally. Her spine curved. One leg thickened, hardening into something no longer human. Horns pushed through her hairline as though they had always been there. A long tail slid silently across the tiled floor. Eliam giggled. The sound echoed strangely. Nkiru hummed, a tune older than language. The temperature dropped. Shadows gathered in corners where light refused to settle. They emerged slowly. Tall, thin figures, twisted reflections of humanity, sliding out of walls, ceilings, empty spaces. "Eat," Nkiru said softly. The kitchen responded. Cabinet doors opened. Plates rattled. Food vanished faster than the eye could follow. Whispered laughter scraped along the walls like claws. With every bite, warmth drained from the house. Yet the nursery remained untouched. Invisible rings of fire shimmered faintly around Eliam's crib. Nkiru hissed. She reached toward the baby, but stopped, her fingers meeting resistance, heat pressing back against her skin. She recoiled sharply, fury flashing in her red eyes. Still praying, she muttered. From the shadows came a low rumble, approval mixed with impatience. "This house will fall," Nkiru whispered. "Just not yet." By the time Adanna returned that afternoon, the shadows were gone. The air was warm again. The floors gleamed. Nkiru stood at the sink, humming softly, human once more. But as Adanna stepped inside, a shiver ran through her spine for no clear reason. Something had happened. And though she couldn't see it, the house had been claimed, at least in part. The door had closed, and the battle had officially begun. Daniel Adebayo had always believed he was a disciplined man. He loved his wife, he respected his home, he provided, protected, and prided himself on being different from the men whose stories filled group chats and late-night jokes. Temptation, he believed, was something careless people struggled with. Until it entered his house quietly. It did not arrive dressed improperly. It did not flirt openly. It did not cross visible boundaries. It arrived as comfort. A calming presence, a gentle voice, a strange ease he could not explain. Nkiru never met Daniel's eyes for long. She spoke softly. She moved efficiently. She seemed almost invisible. And yet, whenever Daniel entered a room, he felt noticed. One evening, he returned late from Ikoyi. Traffic had drained him. The house was quiet. Adanna had already put the children to bed and retired early. Daniel walked into the kitchen to get water. Nkiru was there. The generator light flickered briefly, casting shadows across her face. For a split second, Daniel felt something surge through him. Warm, electric, unsettling. Their hands touched as she handed him the glass. The air shifted. Daniel pulled back immediately, his heart racing. "Sorry," he muttered, embarrassed by the sudden tightness in his chest. "It's nothing, sir," Nkiru replied, eyes lowered. But it was not nothing. That night, Daniel lay awake beside his sleeping wife, his thoughts returning again and again to the kitchen, to the touch, to the pull that felt unnatural yet deeply persuasive. He whispered a short prayer, not desperate, not intentional, then turned over and slept. And unseen to human eyes, something stirred. From the shadows of the nanny quarters, a tall, dark presence emerged, the watcher of the covenant. His voice was low, sharp with displeasure. "You were sent to destroy," he hissed, "not to desire." Nkiru stood before him, head bowed. "He is weak," she replied calmly, "and weakness is a door. Do not confuse access with affection," the watcher warned. "Lust binds faster than fear, but it comes with consequences." The next evening, the door opened fully. What began as vulnerability crossed into agreement. Quiet, unseen, unforced. No screams, no struggle. Just consent, where resistance should have stood. And something ancient marked the moment. By morning, Daniel felt normal, strong, unchanged. But something unseen had attached itself to him. And across the house, Adanna woke suddenly, her spirit unsettled. She knelt and began to pray, longer than usual, heavier than before. The house listened, because one door had been opened by lust. and another would soon be forced open by consequence. The scream tore through the house just before dawn. Adanna was already moving before her mind fully caught up. Bare feet hitting the tiled floor, heart pounding, instinct pulling her towards Zara's room. She burst through the door and found her daughter sitting upright in bed, shaking violently, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy," Zara gasped, clutching her chest. "I saw a woman." Adanna pulled her close instantly. "What kind of woman?" "She was smiling," Zara whispered. "But she wasn't human. She tried to pull me away." Adanna's blood ran cold. "There was fire around my bed," Zara continued, her voice trembling. "She couldn't cross it. She was angry." Adanna did not scream. She did not panic. She knelt. Right there on the bedroom floor, she placed both hands on Zara's head and began to pray. Not softly, not hurriedly, but with authority that came from long obedience. "The Lord is your keeper," she declared. "No evil shall come near you. No spirit shall cross what God has sealed." As she prayed, the air in the room shifted. Warmth returned. Zara's breathing slowed. Her trembling stopped. Peace settled like a blanket. But the warning did not lift. At breakfast that morning, Daniel complained of a strange heaviness in his legs. "I probably slept wrong," he said casually, forcing a laugh as he adjusted his chair. Adanna watched him closely. Across the table, Nkiru moved quietly, serving food as usual. Her head was bowed, her movements precise. But when Adanna prayed aloud before eating, Nkiru's fingers twitched. Just once. Just enough. That night, Adanna prayed longer than she ever had. She anointed the children's doorposts with oil. She prayed over the kitchen, over her marriage, over her husband's body. In the spirit realm, fire rose higher. In the nanny quarters, Nkiru screamed, not aloud but inwardly. The watcher of the covenant appeared again, anger blazing. "She is increasing her fire," he growled. "Your time is shortening." "I will finish this," Nkiru replied through clenched teeth. But for the first time, doubt flickered in her voice. Because heaven had warned Adanna, and mercy had arrived, not to frighten her, but to prepare her. The storm was no longer approaching. It was already inside the house. It happened just before sunrise. Daniel swung his legs over the edge of the bed, preparing for another long day, when the world tilted beneath him. He tried to stand and fell. At first, he laughed it off, embarrassed. "My legs, they feel heavy," he said, trying again. Nothing moved. Panic rushed into his eyes as he slapped his thighs, then his knees. "Adanna," he whispered, voice cracking. "I can't feel my legs." She was beside him in seconds. Fear flooded the room like cold water, but Adanna did not scream. She called for help, her hands shaking as she tried to lift him. Daniel's face twisted, not with pain, but terror. Something deep inside him knew this was not ordinary. Within the hour, sirens cut through the early Lagos traffic as they raced towards St. Raphael Memorial Hospital, Ikoyi. Doctors ran tests, scans, blood work, reflex checks. Nurses whispered, consultants frowned. Finally, one doctor spoke carefully. "There's no stroke, no spinal injury. Medically, he shouldn't be paralyzed." Adanna sat beside Daniel's bed, her heart pounding, her spirit burning. She understood. This was not a hospital problem. That evening, she returned home alone. The house felt different, too quiet, too still, as though it were holding its breath. Nkiru met her at the door, face calm, voice gentle. "Ma, I've put the children to bed." Adanna said nothing. She went straight to the children's rooms, laying hands on each one, whispering prayers through tears she refused to let fall loudly. When she reached Eliam, heat surged beneath her palm, stronger than before, alive. In the nanny quarters, unseen by human eyes, Nkuru stood rigid as shadows gathered. "It is done," she said coldly. The Watcher of the Covenant emerged, towering, satisfied. "The man has fallen. The house will follow." But even as he spoke, the walls trembled. From Adanna's room rose the sound of prayer, not begging, not panic, but warfare. Scripture declared aloud, the name of Jesus spoken again and again, oil poured, authority enforced. The Watcher snarled, "She is not backing down." Nkiru clenched her fists, fear and fury colliding. She should have broken by now. But Adanna did not break. She prayed until exhaustion forced her to sleep on the floor beside her bed. Daniel lay paralyzed in a hospital room. The house stood under siege. And a praying woman had finally recognized the battle for what it truly was. With Daniel confined to a hospital bed in Ikoyi, the weight of the house shifted entirely onto Adanna's shoulders. By day, she remained the composed executive, signing documents, leading meetings, answering questions with steady authority. No one at Oryx Technologies suspected the war she fought each night. By night, Adanna became something else entirely. A watchman. Sleep abandoned her. Every creak of the house woke her. Every silence felt intentional. She prayed at intervals, before midnight, at dawn, in the quiet hours when the city outside finally slept. Nkiru, meanwhile, stepped seamlessly into control. She anticipated Adanna's needs before they were spoken. Meals appeared at the right times. The children's schedules were memorized. Even prayer times were gently reminded. "You should rest, Ma," Nkiru said one evening, her voice soft concern. Too much stress is not good for your spirit." The words sounded kind. The intent was not. Adanna studied her quietly. There was nothing outwardly wrong. No raised voice, no defiance. Yet the air around Nkiru felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. That night, Eliam refused to sleep. Each time Nkiru lifted him, he cried sharply, arching away as if in pain. But the moment Adanna held him, he calmed instantly, resting his head against her chest. Adanna felt it then. Heat, not fever, power. She carried Eliam into her room and began to pace, praying aloud. "Whatever followed my husband will not follow my children," she declared. "This house belongs to God." The walls trembled. In the nanny quarters, Nkiru staggered back as an invisible force pressed against her chest. The Watcher of the Covenant appeared again, rage blazing. "You are losing ground," he snarled. "She cannot keep this pace," Nkiru replied. But doubt had crept into her voice, because something was changing. The children clung to Adanna more. Zara watched Nkiru with quiet suspicion. The twins fell silent whenever she entered a room. And Adanna, though exhausted beyond measure, felt sharper, more alert, as though her spirit had finally taken full command. The house was no longer asleep, and the one who had entered through the back door could feel it. Her time was running out. The morning everything was exposed began like a mistake. Adanna was already halfway to Victoria Island when her heart dropped sharply into her stomach. The file. The Oryx contract. 6 months of work, the document she had reviewed until midnight, was still on her bedside table. She swore under her breath signaled the driver, and turned back toward Lecky Chevron Drive. As the car entered the estate, unease settled over her like a physical weight. The compound was too quiet. No generator hum, no movement. Even the security men seemed distracted, their eyes unfocused, their greetings delayed. Adanna stepped out of the car slowly, her spirit already alert. Then she heard it. A low, wet sound. Not human. It came from inside the house. Her pulse thundered as she pushed the front door open. The smell hit her first. Wrong, heavy, ancient. She followed the sound down the hallway, past the twins' room, past Zara's door, her steps slowing with every breath. It was coming from the nursery. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door open just enough to see. Nkiru sat on the bed with Eliam in her arms. But she was no longer human. Two thick horns curved from her head. One leg had transformed into something clawed and powerful. A long tail lay coiled lazily against the floor. Her eyes glowed red as she hummed softly to the baby. For a fraction of a second, time froze. Then Adanna screamed, not in fear, but in authority. Jesus! The name struck the room like fire. Instantly, the creature convulsed. Horns vanished. Flesh snapped back into place. The tail recoiled and disappeared. The beast collapsed inward, reshaping itself into the calm, obedient maid Adanna had known. Adanna rushed forward, snatching Eliam into her arms. Clutching him so tightly, her own heart began to calm only when his did. Tears streamed down her face, not from terror alone, but from grief, rage, and fierce maternal clarity. "So it was you," she whispered. Nkiru stood slowly. She did not beg, she did not cry. Instead, she lifted her head. "Yes," she said coldly. And in that moment, every doubt Adanna had ever suppressed shattered completely. The battle was no longer hidden. Heaven had pulled the curtain back, and the truth now stood fully exposed in her house. The nursery fell into a silence so thick it felt heavy on Adanna's chest. She stood frozen, Eliam pressed tightly against her, his small fingers gripping her blouse as though he could sense the danger that had just been revealed. His breathing was calm, steady, protected. Nkiru straightened her uniform slowly, as if dignity still mattered. "Yes," she repeated, her voice flat. "I was sent." Adanna's knees trembled, but she did not step back. Fear surged, but something stronger rose beneath it. Clarity. "Sent by who?" Adanna asked quietly. "By the kingdom you pray against every night," Nkiru replied. A flicker of red flashing briefly in her eyes. "I was assigned to scatter your destiny, to end this family quietly." Adanna swallowed hard. "You couldn't touch my children." Nkiru's lips curled, frustration cracking through her calm mask. "Every night you prayed, I saw fire around them. I tried. I could not cross it." Her voice sharpened. "I poisoned your food. Your prayers pushed it out. I watched. I waited. I adapted." Adanna's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. "And my husband?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nkiru stepped back, her expression turning cold. "I did not force him. He desired me, and when he crossed that line, he opened a covenant." Adanna felt the weight of the words crash into her chest. "His legs obeyed my word," Nkiru continued, "because what is offered willingly is claimed legally." Tears streamed down Adanna's face, not tears of defeat, but of devastating understanding. "So it was never coincidence," she said slowly. "It was war." "Yes," Nkiru snapped, and your prayers disrupted everything. You made this house unbearable for me." The air in the room vibrated as Adanna tightened her hold on Eliam. "You failed," Adanna said, her voice steady now, "because God stood between you and my children." For the first time, something like anger, real, uncontrolled, twisted Nkiru's face. "You don't understand the cost," she hissed. The man opened the door, and doors, once opened, demand payment. Adanna lifted her head. "Then I will stand in the doorway," she said, "until heaven answers fully." The nursery walls trembled, because darkness had spoken its truth without shame. And now, faith would answer without fear. The moment stretched, heavy, sacred, irreversible. Adanna did not scream. She did not faint. She did not run. She did something far more dangerous to darkness. She stood. With Eliam secured against her chest, Adanna stepped fully into the center of the nursery, positioning herself between Nkiru and the door, between the infiltrator and the rest of her home. Her legs trembled, but her voice did not. "You entered my house through convenience," Adanna said calmly, "but you will leave through authority." Nkiru laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think this ends with shouting names?" Adanna shook her head slowly. "No, it ends with obedience." She knelt, right there on the nursery floor, still holding her child. Not in defeat, never in defeat, but in alignment. Oil stained her palms as she lifted them, declaring scripture she had lived long before she ever understood why it mattered. "This house belongs to God," she said. "Every covenant not planted by Him is uprooted. Every door opened in ignorance is sealed by mercy." The temperature in the room surged. The air grew dense, alive. The walls vibrated as if something unseen pressed hard against them. In the nanny quarters, shadows gathered in agitation. And then, the Watcher of the Covenant appeared. His presence filled the space, towering, ancient, furious. "She is standing in the gap," he snarled. "That was never permitted." Adanna did not look at him. She kept her eyes lifted, not in arrogance, but in dependence. "I do not need permission from darkness to protect what God gave me," she said quietly. The Watcher recoiled, not from her words, but from the authority behind them. Nkiru staggered backward, her composure cracking completely now. Fear bled through her voice. "You are exhausting yourself. You cannot hold this ground forever." Adanna rose slowly, still holding Eliam, still praying. "I don't need forever," she replied. "I only need to stand until heaven finishes what it started." The house shuddered, and for the first time since Nkiru crossed the threshold of the Adebayo home, the darkness did not advance. It retreated, because a praying woman had recognized her assignment, and she had chosen to stand, not as a victim, but as a gatekeeper. The shift was subtle, but final. It began not with thunder, not with shouting, but with release. The oppressive weight in the nursery lifted, as though an invisible hand had opened a sealed window. Air rushed back into the room. Warmth replaced the cold. Eliam sighed softly against Adanna's chest, his body relaxing completely. Nkiru screamed. Not the controlled, silent kind she had mastered, but a raw, exposed cry that tore through the walls of the house. She fell to her knees, clutching her head as if something unseen were being torn away from her. The Watcher of the Covenant stepped back. For the first time, there was no anger in his posture. Only resignation. "She chose endurance," he said coldly. "And endurance invokes judgment." Adanna remained standing, tears flowing freely now, not from fear, but from the weight finally lifting. She did not chase the darkness. She did not boast. She simply kept praying. Scripture after scripture, promise after promise. The shadows recoiled as though burned. The watcher faded, his form dissolving into the corners of the house he no longer had access to. Nkiru collapsed fully to the floor. When she looked up again, her eyes were no longer red. They were empty. "This house is sealed," Adanna said quietly. "You have no assignment here." Nkiru's voice came out broken, stripped of confidence. "Then I am finished." "Yes," Adanna replied. "Here you are." Later that day, Daniel stirred in his hospital bed. Sensation returned slowly, first a tingling, then warmth, then movement. Nurses rushed in as his toes twitched, then his legs. By nightfall he stood, shaking, humbled, alive. When he returned home days later, the house felt different. Lighter, awake, clean in a way no mop could achieve. Nkiru was gone. No argument, no confrontation, just absence. Adanna knelt that night in her bedroom, not to fight, but to thank God. She understood now. That prayer is not a last resort. That convenience must never replace discernment. That mothers are not just caregivers, but gatekeepers. And that some battles are not loud because darkness hates attention. The Adebayo home did not become perfect, but it became protected. And that, Adanna knew, was the greatest victory of all.